Hi, my name is Emma Reed. I'm an 8th grade math teacher, and this video is going to cover Unit 9, Project Number 1, What Influences Temperature? So the goal for this project, and there's another project I'll do a video for that's about tessellation. The goal for these two projects in Unit 9 at the end of Open Resources 8th grade curriculum is to have students apply what they learned throughout the year into a larger project. So you can see here it tells us that the goals of the lesson, which is going to be broken down into multiple days for the projects at the end of the year. The goals of this project are to contrast orally or out loud the benefits of modeling data using functions to identify input-output pairs and using statistics to analyze bivariate data. The goal is also to create a math model of bivariate data using a scatter plot and use it to make predictions in writing. And then finally, to interpret a scatter plot and line of fit that model temperature and latitude and explain out loud the limitations of the model. So the big goal of these two projects in Unit 9 are for students to understand the application of the math that they've learned. So the big practice goal here is modeling with mathematics and students getting to interact with real data. They're also applying their statistics and probability standards, but more importantly, they're getting a chance to really do the application stage of multiple aspects of the math that they've learned. So in teaching these projects, you want to really understand with backwards design what the goal of the project is as you go into the first lessons on this topic of what influences temperature. So you want to look at the required preparation. For the what influences temperature activity, it's important to find out the latitude and average high temperature in September for your city, so for New York City for us. You can also move down and see the standards that this project is aligned to, so you can see it pulls from the function standard as well as the statistics and probability standard of investigating patterns of association and bivariate data. The lesson narrative section is always extremely helpful from Open Up Resources. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, and it is linked in the slide deck for these lessons about this project, but I am going to pull out just a few key pieces that I want to highlight so that you're prepared to go into facilitating this project with students. As I mentioned before, the core of this project is about math modeling or math practice 4. And then also it's important to note that these lessons are going to build on each other. So they're not like the other lessons in this unit where maybe you could take one lesson, skip a couple other lessons, and students could enter into that next lesson just fresh. This is a project, so it builds over time, and it's important to do each section, in the order they're given so that students are prepared to do the final project at the end. So now I'll scroll down to get to the meat of the project. So there are 3 first activities, and in those activities, students investigate whether there is a relationship or pattern of association between the north-south location of a place and its temperature. So it's a vague question, and it's going to allow students to actually do the modeling of coming up with clarifying the variables themselves and considering their usefulness for a mathematical model. So I'll summarize these first 3 activities and then talk about the next 4. So these 3 activities in order set up students to basically clarify those variables. So first, they think about different factors that influence outside temperature. In the second activity, they decide whether a function would be a good tool to model the situation. And finally, in the third activity, students decide if a more meaningful model might be to look at an association between latitude and temperature. So this project is great because it shows students the choices that we are able to make with math. So in a lot of cases, people will talk about math as being the one subject where you have one correct answer. And the nice thing about this project is that it shows the aspect of mathematics where we evaluate which model is the most appropriate. So because this project is coming at the end of all of their 8th grade units, students have already learned deeply about functions and learned about associations in bivariate data in scatter plots, and that offers us the chance to allow students to realize when one model makes more sense than another, which is a much more realistic way of interacting with math than when we kind of silo different skills. Now let's move on to the next 4 activities in this project. So the first three really set up like which model is most appropriate, how should we do this? The next four activities, students are going to construct a math model to investigate if there's an association between latitude and temperature. So they're going to make a scatter plot of latitude and average high temperature in September for cities across North America. They're going to use, we'll have to use a virtual manipulative to find a line that best approximates the data. And then they'll find an equation for that line. And the data is already given to us as part of these activities. And then in the final activity, students will analyze the model and use it to make a prediction and draw conclusions. They're going to interpret the math features of their model, slope and intercepts of the line, and discuss the limitations of the model, which is another excellent aspect of this project. You know, when we use math to try to understand a real-world situation, it fits really well in certain ways, and there are always going to be limitations, and it's really good to have that conversation with students. So now I'm just going to switch over to showing the first lesson for this project, just so we set the stage for students to be successful by the end of their series of lessons on the project itself. So you can see this is Unit 9, Day 1, and we have our big focus question, what influences temperature? And again, this is part 1 of 4. So is temperature a function of latitude? That's our other question to focus on here. So this lesson is part of a 4-part series, and this is making it transparent to students that will give you the opportunity to put together several of the math skills you've learned this year. So we've adapted what was given to us in the Open Up curriculum with those different, like 7 different sections, and it's designed to be 4 here. So each of the 4 lessons, like we said before, will build on each other, and you'll be asked to use the information you found in one lesson to answer questions in the next. So this should be really super clear to teachers as we're implementing this, and also transparent for students. So it's not that we've cut out anything that we looked at on the Open Up Resources site, it's just been combined together. So you can see this lesson is kind of activity 1, where we talk about what are the factors or variables that could influence outside temperature. And then they also move into this idea of is a function an appropriate model through the lens of 2 different students thinking. So they hear these 2 claims. We talk about the advantages and disadvantages to using a function. So you can see up here it says, Andre and Lynn are discussing whether it is possible to define latitude and temperature in a way that makes sense to talk about temperature as a function of latitude. So again, we're evaluating the effectiveness as a model. Instead of there being just one answer, we're exploring like what type of math would be most helpful to understand this real situation. And you want to keep that thread through the whole project. So they think about whether a function would be appropriate for finding the temperature right now in different cities with different latitudes, finding the daily high temperature at cities that have different latitudes, finding the average high temperature in a specific month. So they talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of those, and then finding the average yearly temperature at cities that have different latitudes. So for each of those different options, they're thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of thinking about temperature as a function of latitude. And finally, in their summarize section, they're going to summarize their findings from this project. So you may want to consider creating some kind of graphic organizer where students can pull each of their summarized sections for the project so they're prepared for the next day. I hope it was helpful thinking about ways to set it up for this project that should be fun to explore with students. Thank you for joining me today, and have a beautiful day.